I'm Jordan Valdina. I'm a registered architect and a professional engineer. Designing spaces and connecting people to places they love is what I do. Using the material in this program, my hope is that I may inspire and provide value to you in your journey through our built environment. This is the Architecture Show.
Hello and welcome to the Architecture Show. It's not the only architecture show, it's just one, but I find the use of the word "the" a little more pleasing. In fact, it's probably the reverse of being the architecture show because it's very conversational, very informal in a sense, but by no means disconnected from the actual practice. Certainly actually connected to the reality of these things, but talking about them very person to person, very off the cuff, very conversational. Layperson's terms, yeah, okay, you could call it that. More important, it's just sort of conversational, including subjective perceptions that I have of things and stuff for whatever value that might be. There's certainly plenty of technical literature and content out there, of course, actual accredited degrees, professional continuing education. There's as deep levels as you want to go with it, really, which is one of the exciting things about architecture. It's a continual learning. And comes some emergency service vehicles now. Regulations speak to accommodating emergency access, vehicular access to varying levels and sizes, degree, numbers, width of the truck, turnaround and everything. Land use regulations under zoning generally speak to those requirements. And so it's a great launch point into the way everything is in our built environment is really considering architecture. And all it connects to. So it's not divorced from engineering and planning and urban planning and interior design and landscape architecture and the different branches of engineering and the construction trades and the business within which it all happens. It's a point of focus. Like all of these sectors, all of these roles and trades and services and professionals all represent, of course, a particular focus that then contributes to producing all this, which is us living, making a living, etc. So there's really no part of the built environment that architecture does not address. It focalizes as a hub by default around the building, the actual building structure. But there's nothing about architecture per se that says that can't then relate to designing something that, of course, is artistic, often in the form of the building, but the building is a big sculpture in so many words, has a very structurally very functional and accessible and accommodates various functions, etc. And yet it's a three-dimensional work that, of course, more artistic levels can be taken to, that often relate to the budget of the project and equally importantly, often more importantly, the priorities of the client for generally wanting something on the scheme of things normal, maybe with a flourish, but so that's a general context of buildings, or whimsical, or avant-garde, or really artistic. So that's all possible. It's not your everyday project. But all these things are the built environment, and they're how we think about the built environment. And architects, again, hold that post, if you will, of serving in the way of, hey, I'll help you design, align, orchestrate the construction of the built environment, and specializing, of course, in what we refer to as architecture, as buildings. But, again, there are aspects of a guardrail that could be architecture, even though normally it would be an engineer designing that. But if there were a need, there could be an aspect of a rock formation leading up to a house that also gets addressed by the architect. Or the interposition of elements that relate to but are still of the built environment, like, depending on your perspective, I would say very elegantly, the nice big simple slab coming cantilevering over and falling water, Frank Lloyd Wright, not to name somebody who's named all the time, but there's a reason a lot of these people who are named all the time are, and it's often because they've done things that When you really sit, really connect with it, you realize it's really great. But just how much and in what way, that's your taste, that's your preference. So this is just conversationally about what architecture is. It's design, thinking about, designing, and helping to implement. So in this day and age, it's not necessarily managing the construction, but rather at least providing a real design. Generally wouldn't quote. Now, architecture itself, the actual word, has become a professionally controlled term in a normal context anyway, to mean somebody who is licensed in the profession of architecture, and to do so they had to meet very specific standards, degrees, numbers of years in practice under a licensed professional, number of areas in which they performed that practice and what they learned, to then be allowed to take a number of tests, all of which they have to pass, to then pay the relevant organization, once they say, yes, we recognize you've passed that test, say, okay, here's my certification fee, you get your actual certificate. Okay, that person is then practicing architecture. What they do, by definition, is architecture. But then there is the more subjective and human and artistic and just conceptual essence of the word architecture, where you could go, they're licensed as an architect, but what they're doing isn't worthy of the word architecture. So now you're hearkening to something beyond. Or somebody who's not licensed, certainly equally possible, right? Hopefully more possible than the licensed architect not doing the job. Hopefully more possible is somebody who's not licensed who designs something. You go, that's a really great design. In fact, that is a work of architecture if you're the one behind that design. Legally, however, it could be called architecture, but what that person did to produce it couldn't be called architecture in most jurisdictions because it's a legally controlled professional term. So they weren't practicing architecture, but they could have created a work of architecture by definition, or by concept essence to be a high compliment, or at least something that designates a certain level of orchestration of three-dimensional form, the building, the built environment, and all connected materials, surfaces, lighting, soundscape, how you relate to your environment, what it feels to be like in this house, in this building, whatever it is, in which room and why, and all those things. All of that stuff is architecture. Now, it can't exist divorced from the technical understanding of the various systems that an architect orchestrates. But an architect, indeed, on the scheme of things, designs and specifies, but a large measure of it is orchestration because it goes beyond their direct area of expertise. But their direct area of expertise is to sit in a position of coordinating the other areas of expertise insofar as they support the construction, the design and construction of the built environment. So normally an architect would not design the mechanical system if it was something of any real complexity, even a very basic level in a residence, generically speaking, even if maybe they could, it's not their thing that they're focusing on every day. Get an engineer to do that. Or a contractor under design build for smaller projects or projects that allow it. Electrical systems likewise, though an architect will propose where lighting goes and may, according to the building department in the jurisdiction, may have to show a compliant electrical plan with a sufficient number of outlets that meet code, or he might be able to pass that off on the electrical installer, the electrical contractor, to meet code and to get their electrical inspection. So architecture comes to the edge of all these things and may or may not embrace them in total. It does embrace in total the layout and dimensionality and fundamental basic structure for life safety, protection of public health, safety in the environment, protection of life in buildings and in the associated to and from of the buildings, stairs and stuff. It's in their purview. Directly. Structure, as it gets a little more complicated, very well could bring on a structural engineer. So we talked about mechanical, electrical, structural, sub-areas or related areas that are mechanical. There's specifically heating, cooling, and ventilating, HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. There's plumbing engineering, which might be needed on a certain scale of building, but not others, because the plumber could do it, again, design build on smaller residential often is allowed, according to residents. Fire protection, which is, you know, relative of plumbing for sure, but it's designated in its own sort of realm. You know, it could just be a bunch of pipes with water or sprinkler heads. On the other hand, there's dry activated systems. There's all sorts of things that are in the purview of fire protection. So plumbing and fire protection, electrical, security systems, entertainment systems, data network systems, various more specialized engineering, acoustical design. Some architects specialize in that, but often there's an acoustical designer. There could be an acoustical engineer. So that's just sort of in a nutshell view of what an architect is, what an architect does. And the basis of understanding their value is they are accountable by law. This is the legal, professionally certified version of it. The one outside of that, it might have been a little more loosey-goosey, but in effect it's the same thing. It's by hiring you, I know I'm going to get a building that works and that I like, or that works better and that I like more than untrained people trying to do this. For those who don't have enough experience with good architecture and what an architect does, the value might be a little more mysterious depending on somebody's sort of own proclivity for designing space or knowing a builder who they appreciate their design sense. But generally, somebody who's seen building after building built understands very well that by having this role of somebody specialized in the design from a perceptual perspective all the way to life safety, protection of property, code compliance, etc., and to whatever level, assisting in the support, the back support, not picking up a hammer, but the coordinating efforts and the checking things over efforts and the reconsiderations as things come up and the budgeting support depending on the project, that there's real value worth its weight for paying an architect to do that. And generally there's a legal requirement for most building projects that you have one or an engineer that is specifically licensed, accepted, specialized in for their level of competence to be able to design the building in question. But generically speaking, of course, the building design is an architect. So that's just a little bit about the profession, the field, what it is, and very broad stroke overview. Architecture is design of the built environment and specifically buildings and things directly connected to them, and the orchestrator of the process of getting whatever additional professional services brought to the table to fulfill that design to its project appropriate level of specification all the way down to the last screw if the project warrants it, via the subconsultants to the architect and the architect, and then to, again, whatever degree the project warrants it, support budgeting, design concept considerations, working on even articulating the design in the first place, something an architect helps with, helping to administer, observe, provide feedback, or a more active role in the construction project without actually doing the construction. That, in the modern day sense, is architecture.
Key